If you're hearing this right now, take a second to smash that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories where humanity proves why we should never be underestimated. Now let's begin. The air smelled of earth and fresh rain as Elias Hale worked his fields, his calloused hands gripping the worn handle of his plow. He was not a man of grandeur or riches, but the soil answered to him, and that was enough. His shoulders carried the quiet strength of one who lived simply, and though others whispered that farming on a frontier world was folly, he'd found something here that gave him peace. He had found companionship. The bear was there as always, a towering brute with a coat as dark as midnight and eyes like amber flames. Locals called it madness, keeping such a creature close, but Elias knew better. He had raised it from a broken cub years ago, when he'd found it caught in a steel trap meant for smaller prey. He had carried it home, fed it, endured its claws and teeth until trust had grown between them like roots through stone. The bear had never left him since. They were not master and beast but partners. When Elias tilled his land, the bear watched, lying on its belly as though the world's worries were beneath it. When Elias walked the forest paths, the bear shadowed him, silent, dreadful to anyone else, but comforting to him. Sometimes, on nights when loneliness crept too close, Elias would sit with the creature under the stars, speaking to it as though it were another man. The bear never answered with words, but its slow breathing, the twitch of its ears, and the steady presence said more than speech ever could. The colony had always lived on borrowed time. Rumors of raiders drifted from distant settlements, aliens who descended on human outposts with chains and fire. But life demanded hope, and Elias had chosen to believe they would pass by this world. Tonight shattered that illusion. The sky burned with streaks of light as ships cut through the clouds. He heard the whine of their engines, felt the ground tremble. The colonists poured into the square, panic smothering every voice. Children screamed, mothers clutched them close, men armed themselves with little more than hunting rifles. Against raiders, such weapons might as well have been sticks. Elias pushed through the crowd, searching for the bear. The beast emerged from the treeline, shoulders swaying, maw wet from a recent kill. Its growl carried across the square like thunder. Some colonists backed away in fear, but Elias stood firm, his voice low. "Easy. Stay close." The raiders fell upon them. They were not men, but scaled creatures with slit-pupiled eyes and armor that shimmered like oiled stone. Their laughter was guttural, their speech thick with cruelty. Energy rifles spat fire, and homes lit up in orange bursts as walls splintered and roofs collapsed. Elias grabbed one of the children, a boy frozen in the square, and pulled him out of the path of a blast. He tried to stand against them. He swung his plow handle, striking one across the jaw, drawing a hiss of surprise more than pain. Another raider seized him, sneering at the defiance of a farmer. Elias spat blood in its face, refusing to bow, and that sealed his punishment. They broke his hands. With calculated malice, the alien commander gripped Elias by the wrist and twisted until bone cracked. He fell to his knees, screaming, cradling what no longer resembled hands but twisted flesh. The raiders laughed, their voices cold, and one of them kicked him aside like refuse. The boy he'd saved was dragged off with the others, chains thrown around his neck. Elias lay in the dirt, vision blurred by agony, watching as his world was torn apart. Colonists were herded together, the unlucky cut down where they resisted. Flames painted the night. His home, his harvest, his peace, all swallowed by greed. He thought he might die there, broken in the dust, but the raiders had other designs. The commander crouched beside him, studying him as one might study an insect. "Human farmer," it hissed in a language mangled by its throat. "You are no warrior. This is what happens when prey resists." Then, almost as an afterthought, it gestured to leave him alive. A warning to the others. A lesson in futility. When the ships roared skyward again, they left silence behind. Silence broken only by the crackle of fire and the whimper of the dying. Elias dragged himself forward, his shattered hands leaving streaks of red in the soil. He crawled past the ruins of his plow, past the corpses of neighbors into the forest shadows. Every movement was pain, but pain kept him awake, kept him breathing. He whispered through clenched teeth, his voice ragged, calling for the only ally he had left. "Come to me, please. I need you now." The forest listened. The night air grew heavy. Branches shifted, and then a shape emerged, a hulking shadow that dwarfed him, its eyes catching the faint light. The bear's growl rolled like distant thunder, deep and menacing. It stood above him, towering, its presence a wall against despair. Elias raised what remained of his hands, trembling. "They took everything." His voice cracked, but his gaze burned with something beyond grief, beyond pain. But not you. Never you. The bear lowered its head until its muzzle brushed his cheek, the heat of its breath grounding him in that moment. In its amber eyes there was no pity, no hesitation, only the primal promise of violence yet to come. Elias felt his broken hands tremble against its fur, and though agony racked him, he whispered words that tasted of iron and fire. "Then we hunt." The beast rumbled, a sound that seemed to shake the earth itself, and the night carried the vow forward. The raiders had left him alive to teach a lesson. They would soon learn the wrong man had been spared. The forest floor was damp beneath Elias's knees as he pressed his back against the rough trunk of a cedar, the bear looming nearby. His hands hung uselessly in his lap, swathed in strips of torn shirt that did little to stanch the bleeding or bind the bones. Each twitch of a finger sent a spear of agony through him, but he refused to falter. Pain was a reminder that he lived, and living meant there was still a debt to pay. The bear watched him with unblinking eyes, nostrils flaring at the scent of blood. It shifted its weight as if restless, a hunter waiting for the moment its master would loose it upon prey. Elias met that gaze, his jaw clenched. "I can't hold a rifle," he muttered, half to himself, half to the beast. "I can't grip a blade. But you don't need steel." Memories pressed in unbidden, dragging him back through the years. He remembered the first time he'd seen the cub, a tiny thing snarling through pain, its leg caught in rusted iron teeth. He had risked his own skin to free it, taking slashes across his forearm as it fought. He hadn't expected it to live, but he'd fed it, nursed it, endured its rages until strength returned. What had begun as stubborn pity had grown into something more, an understanding. The bear had never turned on him again. It had chosen him as much as he had chosen it. Now, in the ashes of ruin, it remained the only companion he had left. The forest carried whispers of the raiders. Their patrols moved with heavy boots and the rasp of metal, their guttural voices spitting curses at the wilderness. They hunted stragglers, laughing when they caught one, dragging them screaming toward the looming silhouette of their ship beyond the ridge. Elias listened, memorizing their movements, studying how they split into groups. His mind, though battered, worked with a farmer's patience, measuring, weighing, calculating. He tested his fingers again, the pain sharp enough to blur his vision. No weapon would obey his command. His body was broken, but the bond beside him was whole. He turned to the bear, reaching out, forcing his ruined hand to brush against its thick fur. "You'll be my strength," he whispered. "My teeth. My claws." That night he began. Moving silently through the trees, he scouted the nearest patrol. 4 raiders trudged along a trail, weapons loose in their claws, overconfident in the darkness. Elias crouched low, signaling with a hiss and a gesture of his shoulder. The bear understood. It melted into the shadows like a phantom, its bulk making no sound, its breath steady. A scream tore through the night. The first raider vanished into the underbrush, dragged down before it could fire a shot. The second whirled, only to have its throat torn open in an eruption of blood. The others fired wildly, blue energy bolts lighting the trees. Elias crawled closer, ignoring the agony in his hands, and seized a dropped rifle with his broken grip. He could barely hold it, but he forced his fingers to curl enough to brace the stock against his arm. With gritted teeth, he fired a wild burst. One raider fell shrieking, convulsing in the dirt. The last turned to run, only to meet the bear's bulk as it lunged, breaking the alien in two with a twist of its jaws. Elias staggered forward, the rifle slipping from his grip. He fell to his knees, breath ragged. Around him lay the bodies of his enemies, their armor torn, their blood staining the leaves. The bear padded back, its muzzle wet, its chest rising with slow, deliberate breaths. Elias forced himself to meet its gaze. "Good," he rasped. "They bleed. They can die." He dragged one of the corpses closer, his ruined hands fumbling with the alien's belt until he tore free a pouch of energy cells. His fingers shook, but he shoved the items into a makeshift sack. Even crippled, he could salvage, he could plan. Every tool stolen was one step closer to vengeance. The raiders soon realized something was wrong. Patrols grew tighter, voices sharper. They found their fallen, torn apart in ways they could not explain. Their laughter faded, replaced by wary glances toward the forest's edge. Rumors began among them, an animal spirit, a shadow beast. Elias listened from the dark and smiled grimly. Fear was a weapon too. By the next evening, he had healed enough to stumble upright. The bear never left his side, pacing when he did, resting when he collapsed. Elias began to test it, feeding it scraps of alien gear, showing it the scent of armor and the glint of their weapons. The beast responded with a low growl each time, as though understanding the target of its hatred. Another raid followed. 2 slavers dragged a woman toward camp, their claws gripping her arms. Elias hid in the brush, his heart hammering. He whistled low, a sound the bear knew well. In an instant, it crashed from the undergrowth, slamming into one raider with bone-crushing force. The second spun, rifle rising, but Elias hurled a stone with all his might. It struck the alien's eye, staggering it just long enough for the bear to descend. Blood and fire followed. The woman stumbled free, staring at Elias with shock and terror. "You're alive," she breathed. "Alive enough," he answered. His hands throbbed, his body shook, but his voice carried iron. "Run. Tell the others. Tell them the slavers bleed." She hesitated only a moment before fleeing into the dark, her footsteps carrying his message. Hope would spread. The raiders would not understand how quickly despair could turn to defiance. That night Elias sat beside a small fire, his back against a stone, the bear curled nearby. His hands burned with infection, his fever rising, but his eyes never wavered from the distant glow of the alien ship on the horizon. He had struck once. He would strike again. The raiders thought him broken, a crippled farmer left to rot. They had no idea what they had awakened. He reached toward the bear, laying his ruined fingers against its flank. The beast stirred, lifting its head, watching him in silence. "We'll make them fear the dark," Elias said softly. "We'll make them wish they'd never touched this land." The bear's rumbling growl rolled into the night like a vow. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound settle deep in his chest. The slavers had stolen his people, his home, his peace. But they had left him with fury, and fury was enough. By dawn, the raiders would know they were no longer hunters. They were prey. Smoke drifted above the treeline where the raiders had made their camp, the haze glowing with the shimmer of their alien fires. Elias crouched in the brush, his breath slow, his broken hands bound tight against his chest. The bear lay low beside him, its flanks rising and falling, each breath silent, practiced as though it knew the rhythm of the hunt. Together they watched as the scaled invaders moved about their stronghold, confident in their numbers, oblivious to the shadows watching them. Days of skirmishes had already changed the air. The raiders no longer laughed as freely, their patrols marched tighter, weapons raised instead of slung across their backs. They spoke harshly, glancing toward the forest with a nervousness that betrayed fear. A few of their bodies still lay uncollected at the edges of the clearing, torn and broken where Elias and his beast had struck. He could see it on their faces, their belief that they were predators had been shaken. Elias leaned against the trunk of a tree, pain throbbing through his arms, but his gaze unwavering. He studied them with the same eye he once used for tending crops, watching patterns, predicting growth. The slavers moved in cycles, every 2 hours sending out patrols. Some dragged human captives in chains, shoving them into cages near the center of camp. His neighbors, his kin. They stood silent, hollow-eyed, despair etched deep. He clenched his teeth until his jaw ached. He could not free them yet. Not without breaking the raiders piece by piece. The bear shifted, its head lowering to nudge his shoulder. Elias's lips tightened into the ghost of a smile. "Soon," he murmured. "Not yet." The next strike came at dusk. A pair of raiders scouted near the river, their voices harsh, rifles gleaming. Elias gave a low whistle, a sound sharp and short. The bear slipped into the water with hardly a ripple, swimming beneath the surface, its bulk hidden by the current. The raiders noticed too late, one of them shouting, clawed hand pointing. Then the river erupted. The bear surged upward, jaws clamping onto the nearest alien, dragging it under in a churn of foam and blood. The second tried to fire, but Elias burst from cover, swinging a branch studded with nails he had hammered with his last reserves of strength. The improvised weapon struck the raider's skull with a crack. It reeled, and in the space of a heartbeat, the bear rose again, tearing it from behind. When silence returned, Elias dragged the weapons ashore with his forearms, straining against the torment in his fingers. He would not wield them as a soldier would, but he could set them in the right places for the right hands. He hid the rifles where he knew the surviving colonists might stumble upon them later. Every tool stolen from the raiders was a seed planted against their dominion. The slavers responded with fury. Patrols doubled, search parties lit torches that scoured the woods. But the forest was not theirs, and Elias knew its paths better than he knew the lines on his palms. He guided the bear along ridges and streams, leading them into traps laid with sharpened stakes, lures designed to make them fire into empty shadows. With each night, Another raider disappeared, leaving only screams and silence. Whispers spread among the captives. They spoke of a man still alive, the farmer they'd seen broken in the square, returned from the dirt with a monster at his side. Hope took root in their voices, fragile but growing. Elias heard it when he crept near the cages, heard them murmur his name as though it were already legend. He dared not reveal himself, not yet, but the knowledge strengthened him. He was not merely avenging himself. He was shaping the will of his people. The raiders' commander, scaled hide darker than the rest, snarled orders from the heart of the camp. His voice carried, sharp with anger. Elias could not understand the words, but he understood the tone. They wanted the hunter flushed out, dragged into the open. They wanted to show his corpse to the humans, to crush hope before it bloomed. He almost laughed, a bitter sound in his chest. They had left him broken to be a lesson. Now he was teaching them instead. That night, Elias struck harder. A supply line of raiders hauled crates from their shuttle, unaware that shadows trailed them. The bear darted from cover with impossible speed for its size, bowling one slaver into the dirt, claws rending armor like paper. The others raised their rifles, but Elias hurled stones from the dark, each impact distracting them for a vital instant. The beast took another down, tearing out its throat. Energy fire lit the trees, but the farmer and his companion vanished back into shadow before they could be pinned. 3 corpses lay cooling, their cargo abandoned. Elias staggered through the trees, his chest heaving, sweat soaking his face. The bear walked beside him, uninjured, calm as though the slaughter were nothing more than a task completed. Elias pressed his ruined hands against its fur, steadying himself. "You're more than I ever deserved," he whispered. "But together we'll break them." As dawn crept over the horizon, the forest fell eerily quiet. The raiders did not march so boldly now. Their shouts carried fear, their search parties fired into empty woods at the smallest noise. Their armor clinked with nervous twitching. Elias watched from a ridge, his eyes fixed on the cages where his people stood. The boy he had saved in the square clutched the bars, his face bruised, yet his eyes searching the horizon. Hope glimmered there. Elias's breath caught. He had to give them more than whispers. The bear growled low, ears swiveling toward the camp. Elias followed its gaze. The commander stepped forward, roaring at his soldiers, lifting his weapon high. The gesture carried arrogance still, but Elias saw the cracks beneath it. The slavers were rattled. He felt the weight of inevitability settle on him like a mantle. This was no longer about survival. It was about war. He leaned against the bear, speaking in a rasp that tasted of fire. "We'll bleed them until the last chain falls. We'll burn their ship to the ground." His voice gained strength, each word shaped by fury. "They think we're prey. Let them come into the woods and see what hunts them." The bear lifted its muzzle to the wind, loosing a growl so deep it shook the branches. Elias stood beside it, broken hands trembling, but his spirit alight with unquenchable rage. He had begun the warpath and there would be no turning back. The raiders wanted a lesson. He would carve it into their bones. The alien ship loomed above the camp like a predator in wait, its hull bristling with sharp ridges that caught the moonlight and turned it into cold steel. Its engines pulsed with a low vibration that carried through the ground, a warning of departure. If the raiders left with their captives, they would vanish into the black, and no frontier patrol would ever find them again. Elias watched from the treeline, his body trembling with fever, his ruined hands throbbing with every heartbeat. Yet his gaze held steady. He had delayed long enough. The moment had come. The bear shifted beside him, hulking and silent, its breath steaming in the night air. Elias leaned against it, whispering words through cracked lips. "One last hunt. We end it here." The beast's ears twitched as if it understood, and its eyes glimmered with an amber fire. The camp was alive with movement. Raiders barked orders, shoving the colonists toward the loading ramp. Chains rattled, children sobbed, and the commander strode among them like a king of ash, snapping his jaws in fury. His soldiers looked ragged, worn by days of ambushes, but they still carried their rifles, still sneered at the captives as though victory was inevitable. Elias studied them, memorizing each guard, each torch, each blind corner. He had walked fields his whole life, studying the way weeds grew and crops withered. This was no different. A field of enemies ripe for harvest. He limped forward, the bear gliding into the brush with him, their shadows blending until they were indistinguishable. At his signal, the beast slipped away into darkness, circling wide, silent as mist. Elias crouched low, teeth clenched against pain, and hurled a stone into the far trees. The clatter drew 2 guards away, muttering. That was enough. A whistle, sharp and low, pierced the night. The bear erupted from the opposite side, a wall of fur and fury. It hit the raiders like a storm, claws tearing through armor, jaws closing on a throat with a sickening crunch. Screams rose, rifles fired wild, blue light lancing across the clearing. Elias stumbled forward, seizing a dropped weapon. His hands could not wrap the grip, but he braced it crooked against his arm and shoulder. With a guttural growl, he pulled the trigger, bolts slicing into the chaos. One slaver fell, then another. His arms shook from the recoil, pain searing, but he held on because every shot drove them closer to freedom. The colonists shouted now, voices rising above despair. Some rushed to the fallen raiders, snatching weapons with desperate hands. A woman fired into the melee, her face streaked with soot, her aim steady despite shaking fingers. A boy swung a scavenged blade into the back of a distracted slaver, rage burning where fear once ruled. Elias saw it spread, the spark he had kindled igniting into a blaze. The commander roared, his scaled form towering, eyes blazing with wrath. He lifted his weapon and fired at the bear, energy bolt striking its side. The beast staggered, snarling, but did not fall. Instead, it wheeled on him, blood streaking its fur, fury greater than pain. Elias's heart hammered in his chest. This was the moment. The beast could kill, but only Elias could direct it. He dragged himself forward, every step a lance of agony, and shouted with all the strength left in his lungs. Here. Face me. His voice cut through the din, ragged yet sharp. The commander turned, sneer curling his scaled lips. He saw the farmer, broken and bloodied, hands bound in rags, a mockery of a warrior. He laughed, a sound that grated like rust on stone. You are nothing, the alien spat. A cripple with a pet. Elias's vision blurred with rage. And you are prey. The bear lunged, a living avalanche. The commander fired again, bolts tearing into fur, but momentum carried the beast through the barrage. It slammed into him, claws raking, teeth clamping down. He shrieked, scales cracking under the pressure, and for the first time his arrogance broke. Elias staggered closer, watching as his beast mauled the slaver who had broken his hands. Still, the commander fought, driving a blade into the bear's shoulder, twisting. The beast roared in agony, thrashing, blood spraying across the dirt. Elias stumbled, vision swimming, and saw the fallen rifle at his feet. He dropped to his knees, pressed it against his arm, and with every ounce of will left, pulled the trigger. Bolt struck the commander in the chest, burning through armor, blackening scales. He faltered. The bear seized the opening, jaws snapping shut around his skull. With a brutal wrench, it ended him. Silence fell, broken only by the heavy breathing of survivors. The raiders froze at the sight of their leader's body collapsing, headless, twitching in the dirt. Fear overtook them, rippling through their ranks. Some fired once more before throwing down their weapons. Others fled outright, scrambling into the night. The camp dissolved into chaos. Elias sank to the ground, his body trembling, his breath ragged. The bear limped back to him, blood soaking its fur, but its eyes burned with undimmed fire. It pressed its muzzle to his shoulder, and he leaned against it, broken hands resting in its coat. Around them, the colonists moved cautiously, chains falling, voices lifting in awe. They had been slaves. Now they were free. But Elias did not feel victory. Not yet. He stared at the looming ship, engines humming, the ramp still open, its belly full of cages. If it rose into the sky, even with its commander dead, more would come. The raiders would return, hungrier, vengeful. It had to end tonight here with fire and blood. He turned to the colonists, his voice a rasp but his words clear. Take their weapons. Arm yourselves. We burn that ship before it leaves this ground. They hesitated only a moment before obeying. Fear was gone, replaced by something stronger, defiance. Elias leaned heavily against the bear, his body barely able to stand, but his eyes fixed on the ship. The battle was not yet over. The beast growled low, its body quivering with pain but its spirit unbroken. Together they looked at the towering silhouette of the raiders' vessel, a monument to chains. Elias whispered to it, his lips pressed to its ear. One last push. The night air quaked with the sound of its answering roar. The raiders' ship groaned like a dying beast, its engine struggling against the weight of chaos. Sparks flickered along its hull, systems damaged from panicked gunfire and the bear's earlier assault. Yet still it prepared to rise, its ramp retracting, its thrumming power growing louder, hungrier. Elias swayed on his feet, his body broken but his mind locked with razor clarity. He had bought the colonists their chance, but if that ship escaped the ground, all they had gained would be ripped away by the return of vengeance. He pressed his forehead against the beast's fur, its warmth steadying him, and whispered the only truth that mattered. We finished this. The colonists gathered weapons with frantic energy. Once they had been farmers, miners, laborers, bound by chains and despair. Now their hands gripped rifles and blades, their eyes shining with fury and raw determination. A young woman named Talia stood closest to Elias, a rifle cradled in her arms, soot streaking her cheek. "Tell us what to do," she said, voice hoarse but steady. There was no fear left in her, only resolve. Elias looked into her eyes and saw the spark of something unbreakable. "The engines," he rasped, his throat raw. "Bring them down." The colonists nodded and scattered into position, some climbing onto the hull with stolen charges, others bracing themselves at firing angles. The bear growled low, stalking forward, its body bloodied yet unbowed. Elias limped at its side, dragging himself with stubborn fury. The ship's thrumming deepened, dust rising as the ground shook. Lights flared along its edges, casting harsh shadows across the clearing. The ramp began to close, but Elias raised his voice with all the force left inside him. "Now!" Gunfire erupted, bolts slamming into the exposed engines. Sparks cascaded like meteors, panels bursting. The colonists fired again and again, their fury drowning the night. Explosions rocked the hull. One of the engines whined, shrieked, then burst into fire. A cheer tore from their throats. But the ship lurched upward, 3 engines still fighting, clawing toward the sky. Elias clenched his jaw, his body quaking. It wasn't enough. He turned to Talia. "Take the others. Keep firing. No matter what." She frowned, seeing the intent in his eyes. "What are you?" But he was already moving. The bear lumbered beside him, bleeding from half a dozen wounds, yet when Elias staggered toward the loading ramp, the beast matched his pace. Together they pushed into the storm of smoke and sparks, slipping inside as the colonists' gunfire kept the raiders pinned. The interior stank of fuel and blood, its metal walls slick with condensation. Alarms blared, red light pulsing. A handful of raiders still fought here, desperate to defend their prize. The bear struck first, a wall of claws and teeth. Bones shattered, screams echoed, and Elias forced himself past, every step dragging his shattered body toward the heart of the vessel. The control chamber loomed ahead, doors sealed with alien glyphs. Elias slammed the butt of a fallen rifle against the lock. Sparks flew, the panel dented but held. He cursed, breath tearing from his lungs. Then the bear crashed against the door with a roar, steel bending under its weight. A second strike split the frame, the third ripped it open. Together they stumbled into the chamber. Inside, the pilot screeched in alarm, scrambling at controls, trying to wrench the ship into the air. Elias raised the rifle, braced against his arm, and fired. The bolt punched through the pilot's chest, smoke filling the cabin. He collapsed over the console and the ship lurched, alarms screaming louder. Elias fell to one knee, body failing him, but his eyes burned. He knew what had to be done. The bear nudged him with its massive head as if asking the unspoken question. He reached out with ruined hands, pressing them against its blood-soaked fur. "You've given me everything. One more time." He staggered to the console, sparks stinging his face. He had no training, no knowledge of alien machinery. But he had spent his life coaxing harvests from dead soil, shaping chaos into survival. And here, with death closing in, that stubbornness burned brighter than fear. His fingers, broken though they were, found the levers and buttons that pulsed with energy. He slammed them down, twisted them, forcing systems into overload. The ship screamed as power surged, blue fire racing through conduits. The floor bucked, smoke pouring from vents. He knew he had only moments before the vessel tore itself apart. He turned to the bear, its massive form silhouetted against the flames, and felt something more than companionship, something closer to kinship, bound in blood and struggle. "Go," he whispered. But the beast did not move. It stood, unyielding, eyes locked on his. It had followed him through pain, through chains, through fire. It would not leave him now. Elias's throat tightened. Then together. The ship convulsed, explosions ripping through its belly. Outside, the colonists shouted, retreating as fire bloomed across the clearing. The ship's engines howled, then died in a thunderclap of destruction. Metal tore like paper, the vessel collapsing inward as a wave of heat and light surged outward. When the smoke cleared, only wreckage remained, a twisted carcass of steel, burning against the night sky. The colonists stared in stunned silence, the firelight flickering in their eyes. For a moment no one moved. Then Talia stepped forward, her voice breaking the stillness. "He did it," she whispered. "He ended it." The others echoed her words, first softly, then louder, until the clearing rang with voices. Not grief, not despair, but awe. The chains had been broken, the predator slain, the vessel of their suffering reduced to ash. They looked at one another not as victims, but as survivors reborn in fire. And though Elias was gone, though his broken body had vanished in the blaze with the beast at his side, the memory of what he had done burned brighter than the wreckage. A farmer who had no weapon but stubbornness, who had no ally but a wounded beast, had faced the deadliest predators in the galaxy, and won. In the days to come they would rebuild. They would carry the story of Elias into every corner of the frontier, of the man who rose from broken earth and dared to stand against chains. Some would call him mad. Others would call him myth. But for those who had stood beside him, he would forever be the man who turned prey into predator and predator into prey. And above them all, across a silent night broken by firelight, the stars bore witness.